From misplaced optimism,
India was charging us tremendous tariffs, about the highest in the world.
It came as a huge shock to the Indian system.
to a surprise reprieve.
Dialing down months of tensions on trade.
These tariffs had been reduced to 18%.
A tumultuous first year of Trump 2.0 for the world's fifth largest economy. What lessons has India learned as it navigates Donald Trump's second presidency? Which bets paid off for New Delhi and which backfired as it tried to manage the US president's unpredictable agenda?
My true friend, Prime Minister Modi.
President Trump's first term was a very public celebration of his friendship with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The two leaders met often, and every time they did, the emphasis was on their interpersonal relationship, on the camaraderie they shared, and how these were two populist leaders who had a shared vision for their own countries.
Well, the two leaders had multiple interactions during Donald Trump's first term, and it was very clear that they had this intense bond, a friendship that's really not seen when world leaders get together. All of that culminated in September 2019 in Houston, Texas, the Howdy Modi event, where there were tens of thousands of people packed into this enormous sports stadium. Donald Trump and Prime Minister Modi up on stage. It really was a joyous celebration of US-India ties.
And when President Trump came to India right before he left the White House, that's when Mr. Modi hosted this huge event, a colourful spectacle in his home state that President Trump and his family were present at. And in front of that huge crowd, Mr. Modi said that there was a sweetness to this relationship that reminded one of a unified family.
Then fast forward to February last year, and Prime Minister Modi was one of the first world leaders welcomed to the White House. And on the surface, there was the same warm relationship. They shared an embrace, they held their thumbs up to the camera. I mean, that was the high point. From there on out, their relationship has got much rockier.
The golden age of America begins right now.
There was a section of opinion in India which had welcomed Trump's election as President of the United States. And this was because during his first term, he had been tough on Pakistan and tough on China. And there was this feeling that perhaps, the same policies might be followed.
India-US relations were very good during Trump 1.0. And India got a good billing in the inauguration of Trump. Shankarji went there, and he was given a good place to sit and be part of it. And Quad meeting also, foreign ministers meeting also held. And then Modi ji went there. So the expectations were certainly there that this is a good beginning for Indo-US relations. But it didn't turn out that way.
We could make the argument that a lot has changed, particularly after Pahalgam and Operation Sindoor.
India once again insisting there was no US involvement in its ceasefire with Pakistan.
We were very happy to stop the war that had started with India and Pakistan, two nuclear nations. And I was very honored when the Prime Minister of Pakistan said President Trump saved 10 and maybe 20 million lives by getting that stopped.
Last year, just a few days after 26 people were killed in a deadly terror attack in Indian-administered Kashmir, India carried out strikes across the border on Pakistani soil. It said it targeted terror infrastructure buildings where this terror attack was planned and directed from. Pakistan denied that, but it did retaliate. So for 4 days, we saw the arch rivals engage in a deadly military conflict. They used missiles, drones, fighter jets. But this conflict, as abruptly as it started, it ended just as abruptly when President Trump claimed to have brokered a ceasefire between them.
Exemplary leadership,
There's been a marked difference between Donald Trump's first and second term when it comes to US-Pakistan relations. During his first term, we saw a tense, fraught relationship. Donald Trump accused Pakistan of lies and deceit, of providing a safe haven to terrorists. The US cut more than $1 billion in security assistance. But then in his second term, Pakistan has suddenly become one of the US's biggest supporters. Prime Minister Sharif really has relied on that transactional relationship. He's used deals, flattery, even nominating Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. And then we saw Donald Trump hosting Pakistan's army chief for lunch here at the White House. That was really unprecedented, the first time that the US president has hosted the person who's seen really as the most powerful figure in Pakistan here in Washington.
India and Pakistan are both nuclear powers. Had he not intervened along with his wonderful team, during those 4 days, the war could have escalated to a level. Who would have lived to tell what happened?
Pakistan has been able to develop close ties with Trump and his administration, and in a very unorthodox ways, using cryptocurrency, contracts, and critical minerals, and so many other things. So Op Sindoor was, I think, a turning point in that sense, where Trump claimed credit for Pakistan-India ceasefire, something which India has not accepted.
You know, I've just come from Israel. It was an amazing day.
Given President Trump's personalization of foreign policy, I think it was important to keep him in good humor. And for some reason, I think we have not been as deft as we could have been as far as this is concerned.
Donald Trump likes his ego pandered to. He doesn't like taking no for an answer from anybody.
So all this happened very suddenly, very quickly. The Trump administration itself didn't seem to have any people knowledgeable about India. So the standard channels of interaction, engagements, which are between two sovereign countries through various institutional mechanisms. So that was also, I think, somewhat less effective. Traditionally, the US administrations have known very well for a very long time that India does not like third-party mediation as far as India-Pakistan or Kashmir issue, etc. is concerned. But maybe that expertise or that advice was missing. So this kind of a misunderstanding might have been created. But yes, a misunderstanding at that level and continue to be repeated, that does become a factor.
For many years, it was a one-sided relationship. Only now, since I came along, and because of the power that we have with tariffs, India was charging us tremendous tariffs, about the highest in the world.
Donald Trump, from the time he has been president, even in his first term, his election campaign for the second term, and subsequently after taking office, has been very clear on his position on tariffs and trade and the economy. He's often commented on India's prohibitive tariff regime and the need to be a more open and inclusive trading partner.
He had called India a tariff king, and it was quite clear that we would be in his sights amongst a range of other countries.
If you look at that, China,
what perhaps was not anticipated is the speed and extent to which he was prepared to weaponize trade vis-a-vis the rest of the world.
companies all over the world have announced.
He came with a very good victory margins and very confident. And in fact, he had his own ideas about how he would conduct US foreign policy. So I'm not surprised that there was this lack of, let's say, understanding of what Trump was and what he might do.
Washington deciding last week to slap an additional 25% duties on Indian goods, a move to punish New Delhi over its continued purchase of Russian oil.
If we go back and look at the history, then this was an issue on which India and the US had reached an understanding during the time of President Biden, because the Biden administration was concerned that if this large quantity of Russian oil was suddenly taken out of the market, it would lead to an increase in oil prices. So it was a bit of a shock to suddenly see that we were being targeted for the very policies on which we had an understanding with the United States, the previous United States government.
This 50%, this is the massive number hanging over India, when other countries, for example, Vietnam had 20%, Bangladesh had 20%, Indonesia had 19%, other countries in Asia had much lower rates. It raised a question mark over India's competitiveness.
There has been this perception, and a growing perception, perhaps, in the United States at the political level, that is making the case that India needs to play a greater role or do much more of the US's bidding on the world stage. And I think Donald Trump possibly is just bringing that to its logical conclusion.
I think it's been a wake-up call, in a sense, for India, that being so dependent on one market enhances your vulnerabilities, and it's not a situation with which we should be comfortable.
The US has been the most important relationship for India for more than 20 years now. And it came as a huge shock to the Indian system to sort of, to have to see this relationship in many ways start to unravel. And India is a country where people are very sensitive to job losses because there isn't really much social security and jobs aren't particularly easy to come by. So the political pressure was really building up on Mr. Modi.
The Indian government has taken a fairly cautious and realistic approach. So the Indian government has continued negotiations with the US after a short pause where both sides took stock. And at the same time, they have avoided ramping up the rhetoric. So it's been a policy of what I would call, no confrontation, but no capitulation.
The US president saying he's cutting tariffs on Indian goods to 18% from 50% after phone call with the Indian Prime Minister. Donald Trump's Narendra Modi promised to stop buying Russian oil.
To Mr. Modi's credit and to his team's credit, they held their cool and they seem to have negotiated a pretty good deal. For India, getting away from that awful 50% number was very, very important. And I think they'll be breathing a very huge sigh of relief that they've brought it from 50 to 18, which is quite competitive in the current global landscape. I would be very surprised if India has made deep concessions in the most politically sensitive areas, for example, dairy. They may do sort of things, they may do things like, introduce quotas here and there in places that are politically sensitive. But I don't think that, anyone believes that India is going to suddenly dramatically open up its agriculture market. That was never going to happen, and that's not going to happen.
We have special sensitivities in a sector like agriculture because we are not, competing with those mega corporations which the US has. We have subsistence farming where the average size of the farm is 1.5 acres. And the farmers and their families, they actually eke out a livelihood on the basis of this. And it's not a small percentage of our population, it's 50 to 60%, anywhere between, which might be dependent on agriculture.
These are just simply no-go areas, and on that I will say that's a no-go area whether it's Prime Minister Modi or somebody else. I don't think it's this regime alone that's saying we can't give in on this. I think this regime would have been possibly willing to make many more concessions than previous regimes would have because they see the writing on the wall.
We have to be very conscious as a country that what we do in terms of trade policy does not lead to huge or large-scale livelihood disruptions in the agriculture sector, because that could, apart from causing distress to the individuals involved, it could also lead to huge social protests and to political backlash.
India-US friendship, long live India-US friendship.
There is an erosion of trust in the India-US relationship, and this is also a byproduct, I would say, of the US's revised approach towards China.
For Donald Trump, he sees tariffs like a hammer. He uses them for whatever he thinks, to try to influence drug trafficking, to try to influence immigration, to get whatever he wants out of different nations. And we've seen him be really scattered in his use of tariffs. What he likes to do is say, I'm going to put a tariff on you, and then we can do a bilateral agreement if you want a better treatment. And he has done that with a number of different nations, China being one of them.
He came to power projecting that China was going to be his main target, and that he would ensure that there was fair trade between the two countries. And so he imposed these very high tariffs as soon as he came. Total tariffs of previous tariffs and the new ones took the total tariffs on China to about 145. But soon he was having to walk that back.
April was a time when Beijing just vividly, graphically demonstrated how quickly it could use its dominance in rare earth extraction, refining, licensing, and so on, to create really sort of crisis level shortages in the US, and how fast the pressure mounted on the Trump administration to back down. This was China giving Trump a dose of his own medicine, as they put it. And it showed that although the tariffs are costly for China, China can cope. There was blowback on China for that, but it also raised the political price for Washington in sort of challenging China and antagonizing it.
The Chinese have always been good at the long game. Donald Trump doesn't have that sort of patience. And I think the United States consumer is not going to have a lot of patience either. The consumer in the United States is paying a lot of the price for this. They're feeling the pain. And Donald Trump is worried about them taking it out on him and his party in the midterm elections. This is an opportunity for Donald Trump to try to get something done, because he's got a little bit of a fire under him. Whereas the Chinese are sort of waiting out, saying, oh, you wanted tariffs? Well, that's going to hurt your own people. We'll see how long you can take it.
So many proud, hardworking American patriots, which is what you are.
Having pumped up his MAGA supporters, I feel that Trump then looked around and said, well, where's the other big, large country which is visible, but which doesn't have the leverage which China has? So let's make that the target. And that kind of satisfies his MAGA base, which has been quite vocal about, Indian-American ascendance in the United States, the entry of H-1B workers, which they feel, primarily Indian nationals, which they feel deprives Americans of jobs and so on. You can clearly see that the relationship with India will be played out in the context of how the relationship between the US and China goes.
Good to see you again.
Where?
Me too.
If a US-China relationship develops on the economic side, but is not at the expense of Indian interests, then it's okay with us. But if it is at our expense, then we'll have to see. We want very good relations with the United States. It's a very, very important strategic partner. There's no doubt about that. But that does not take away from our privileged strategic partnership with Russia. President Putin was here very recently, a very excellent, a good visit, and good outcomes came out of that visit.
The Indian economy has shown resilience. Yes, there are important segments of our labor-intensive industries which are impacted. There is textiles and garments, there is leather, there is gems and jewelry, there is marine products. But at the same time, growth this year is being projected at a likely 7.4%, showing that the Indian economy has the resilience to handle the situation.
International relations are always dynamic. Bilateral relations are dynamic. I see it from the point of view, if it gives a fillip for India's strategic autonomy, which it will, then I think I welcome it. Since it's a transactional relationship now, we'll have to see what is in it for us, and they will have to see what is in it for us. And we'll take it from there. India has options. India would diversify its trade, etc., and they are already doing that. They're signing several FTAs and so on.
It is a decisive moment in our partnership.
We also see that Europe is showing now greater interest in India, and India-Europe relationship is now taking a different dimension, which is also a good thing. So diversification, more engagements, different areas, engagement with different areas, etc.
Sometimes if you are signaling too much of accommodation, then it can also further embolden the demands from the other side. So I think somewhere we have to find a balance and find ways to signal that we have lived without the US in the past. When the US in '71, Nixon, Kissinger tilted the US against India, we managed. When the US imposed sanctions against India in the wake of our nuclear tests, we managed. We pulled through, and we can pull through. We are a resilient country. We know how to face difficulties, and it's not going to be the end of the world.